Okay, Wally, whenever you're ready.
Okay, good morning, good Chodesh to everybody.
Good morning, good Chodesh, Rabbi.
The Torah tells us, "B'chukosechem lo selechu." We should not follow or go in the practices of the other nations, primarily the idolatrous nations of the world. Our behavior has to reflect Jewish values, and adopting alien or non-Jewish values or practices could somehow lead us astray in terms of Avodah Zorah and other things. So the question that I would like to address this morning is, to what extent does that apply in the modern world? What modern meaning, I would guess from the, I would probably say 18th century on, when the walls of the ghetto were broken down and people could mingle with society. To what extent could Jews adopt the values or the practices of the non-Jewish society without necessarily losing their inherent Jewishness in terms of their behavior, in terms of perhaps being unduly influenced by non-Jewish or pagan practices? Generally speaking, chukos hagoyim are basically dealing in the ancient world with sorcery, with idolatrous practices, but it's normally interpreted by our Mefarshim as imitating foreign cultures. Rituals, the way they dress, the way they speak, the way they comb their hair. Clearly, these are things that we understand. We don't want to do anything that will take us away from Judaism. But are there non-Jewish practices that are acceptable because they're not necessarily linked to religious practices, although cultural values can sometimes lead people away from Judaism as well? Generally speaking, the halacha has been lenient when it came to those people who had to represent the Jewish community within a non-Jewish society. For example, court Jews were allowed to dress like higher levels of society, not like the Jewish community generally dressed. If you have the old Jewish encyclopedia, the original Jewish encyclopedia, in the section on Jewish dress, there's a 2-page fold-out about how Jews dressed throughout the ages. It's fascinating. It's a color 2 pages. It's very worthwhile if you have it, or go to the library to find it. But what prohibited practices are allowed? I mean, prohibited, it's a contradiction in terms. What non-Jewish practices are allowed versus those that might not be allowed? Now, we know, for example, in Maseches Avodah Zarah, for example, when a king dies, we're allowed to burn his bed and other artifacts of the royal chamber, which was primarily a non-Jewish practice, but we're allowed to do it even though it's similar to what the idolatrous nations did. And they justified it somehow. The Vilna Gaon, on the other hand, forbade all non-Jewish practices unless it had a Jewish origin or could somehow emerge without a non-Jewish influence. For example, it was known that the Vilna Gaon was vehemently opposed to the practice of kaparos on Erev Yom Kippur, and even Tashlich to a certain extent, because this was not necessarily inherently a Jewish practice. Tosfos goes in further, things that are just foolish or nonsensical would also be prohibited. And we know there are many things in what we call today contemporary, quote unquote, culture. The way people, the music of American society today, what passes for music, the way people dress, how fashion changes every year or 18 months. Are these in consonance with Jewish values to imitate how the non-Jewish world behaves culturally? Not necessarily religiously, but culturally, does this have an impact on our Jewishness? Clearly, the Ramah is onto something when he says you can't do things that are related to religious practices of the non-Jewish world. And also, you shouldn't do things that are simply foolish or stupid. And how you define foolish or stupid, I guess, is sometimes subjective, although there are some objective criteria. The practical implication of this, for example, honorific titles that people might have, professional uniforms. Doctors had to wear a certain type of garb. Clergy, even today, in some European countries, rabbis look the same as Christian ministers because they all have to wear the same type of garb, formal clothing. Interestingly, there are those who prohibited cantors from wearing the cantorial gowns that many cantors wear because this looks like a Christian minister when you dress up like that. And it's true. If you look at a cantor today who wears those cantorial, I don't know what you'd call it, a gown, it looks very much like a minister in many European countries, but it's been accepted. One of the values of Judaism is that we were always identified by a distinct type of clothing. That was one of the things that they kept in Mitzrayim during the Shibud. They spoke Hebrew and they dressed different from the Egyptians, so that they were distinct in their behavior. And that consisted throughout the medieval period, and even today. You are aware that there are many people who dress, certainly in the Haredi world and the Hasidic world, they dress differently from everybody else to show that this is a distinct type of Jewish clothing. Even those on the right who wear suits all the time, in white shirts, many of them will not wear a necktie because that's a non-Jewish type of thing. And how neckties came about is a whole separate story, but basically neckties served as handkerchiefs initially because pants were made without pockets and there was no place to put your handkerchief. So anyway, that's a little history about neckties. But Jews, where they dress a certain way, according to the Chochmas Adam, you shouldn't depart from that particular norm. You should be distinct, not only in your behavior, but in your appearance. Today, you can't tell a Jew from a non-Jew except if he's wearing a kippah, because everybody dresses the same way in America, except for those that are, I say, on the right, who always wear. Interesting, by the way, why do those on the right always wear a suit and a jacket? It's a combination of two different factors. Number one, to be distinct from everybody else who may wear more colorful garb, but also because you have to dress a certain way when you daven. You have to dress a certain way if you're benched with a zimun. And if you're always dressed properly, you have no problem running around to get a jacket or a hat or what have you. So that's one of the reasons why they dress the way they do. A yarmulke today, of course, is the one distinctive feature of Jewish garb. The question is it okay to take off your yarmulke in the workplace? When I was growing up, it was very uncommon to see people in the workplace wearing a yarmulke or in the street. Even observant Jews did not wear kippot. Today, everybody wears a kippah. You see it in law offices, you see it in medical offices, you see it all over the business world. It's become more acceptable, but this is I guess, the major difference in Jewish or non-Jewish garb today. Everybody dresses like everybody else in most cases, but the yarmulke, it makes distinct. Those who wear tzitzis out, it's an additional area of distinction. That's a whole separate shiur whether you have to wear tzitzis out or not. There are some people who are very, and I remember a friend of mine who was in the advertising business had a toupee. That was his yarmulke. He couldn't wear a yarmulke to work, but he wore a toupee. That was his yarmulke. Eventually, he realized that that was silly, but whatever. But there are people that do that.
Wally.
Yes.
Okay, so the Pope comes out today, and he comes out with a decree that all the Christian people either says have to wear a yarmulke or they have to wear tzitzis. Does that now create a problem for us?
Not really, because we, as Rabbi Yudin always says, we had it first, and they're imitating us. We're not imitating them. I don't think it's going to happen. Although
I'm saying it's a theoretical question. I know it's never going to happen. I'm just saying if that would happen, would it create a problem?
No, because they're imitating us. We're not imitating them. Number one.
Isn't certain things like have basically changed because we had it first, and then they did? For instance, there's some people I think won't make a wedding in a shul because they make it in a church.
Well, that was a theorem of the Chassam Sofer and the Maram Shik, not so much because of the church, but because of the Reform movement imitated the church. But yes, and there are still Rabbonim today. When I was married, I had asked Rav David Lifshitz to be my Masada Kedushin, and he agreed. But when he heard that I was getting married in a shul, he kind of backed out. And I gave him all the reasons why he shouldn't back out. But he ultimately, he couldn't argue with me on a halachic basis, but he ran away to Israel to run against Rav Goren for chief rabbi of Tel Aviv. So that was his excuse. He was out of the country. But there are people today who follow that cherem, even though it was 200 years ago, who don't want to imitate those who imitate the Goyim. And this is true in many now. In contemporary Israel, for example, in contemporary Israel, you have an issue. You have horse-drawn caskets. You have floral wreaths at the military cemeteries. Standing for a moment of silence on Yom HaZikaron. These are not Jewish practices initially. Rav Avadia Yosef kind of accepted it, but clearly not everybody is in agreement with that. These are things that we do. If you go to a cemetery, you will see, particularly on the Russian matzevos and their tombstones, flowers. It's a Russian custom that they adopted, and you see it in Jewish cemeteries all the time. Now, that particular practice, I think, is not sanctioned by any rabbis, but these things creep into us. Laying wreaths. Again, the main Isur is imitating non-Jewish practices that are related to religious practices. That was the original Isur. It's been extended to those things that are simply nonsense or foolish. So if there are practices in American culture or what passes for culture, we don't necessarily have to follow it, whether it's in style or in fashion, whether it's in types of music that people listen to. You have to use common sense to see if this particular thing is simple nonsense or it's related to a non-Jewish practice. Most of the cultural things that Jews adopt are not related to religion. They're simply pointless or nonsense from a halakhic perspective.
Is this why, Rabbi?
Yeah.
Is this why there are some very right people who will not celebrate Thanksgiving in America, even though it's not religious?
Yes. There are those who are opposed to Thanksgiving because it was initiated by Christians to thank God for the harvest, so they're getting through the difficult winter and so forth. But clearly, if it remained a Christian ritual, it would be prohibited. but it has morphed into what is an American practice. And Rav Soloveitchik certainly said that this is personally permissible to do. Rav Moshe Feinstein was a little bit more measured in his response. He said, don't observe it every year, kind of approach. But clearly, we use the non-Jewish calendar. But again, it's not necessarily in a religious thing, except very often you'll find in Jewish writings, when they quote the date, they will say leminyanam, according to the non-Jewish calendar. It's also important when you write out the date, some people will put down AD, which is Latin for Anno Domini, the year of our Lord, which is why if you append initials after the date, you should put down CE, the date 2025 of the Common Era, not AD, because AD is definitely a Christian reference. Again, if it's not necessarily related to religion and it's simply a foolish custom, you have to use common sense.
Wally,
Yes.
is a Jewish store owner allowed to make a Christmas sale? And are you allowed to buy at a Christmas sale and benefit from it?
Yeah. Unfortunately for the Christians, Christmas has lost much of its theological basis today in America. Christmas today is a commercial undertaking. And unless you go to Mass on Christmas morning, which the majority of Christians, I would imagine, do not go to Christmas Mass. It's become a commercial holiday. You want to call it, I'll give you a practical example related to your question. If you have non-Jewish neighbors, can you wish them a Merry Christmas? Or should you just say, have a happy holiday?
That's what I say.
Okay, because again, Merry, and even saying Merry Christmas, Christmas is not, wow. It's essentially a religious occasion. There is Mass said in the Catholic Church on Christmas. It's a religious event, and unfortunately for them, it has morphed into an American holiday, nothing to do with Christianity. Yeah, you'll have a creche here and a creche there, and showing the baby Jesus in his cradle and so forth. But it's not predominantly in America. It's a business opportunity to have sales. And as I say, most people connect it only tangentially to its Christian origins. As an example of what we shouldn't do, for example, the Vilna Gaon, again, very strong about imitating non-Jewish ways. He was opposed to putting greenery in the shul on Shavuos because this imitates the church. You go into it, if you see pictures of a church or go into a church, it's all, they have the flowers and plants all over the place, especially on their holiday occasions. So this is even though we put greenery in the shul on Shavuos to remind us of the greenery on Har Sinai and Matan Torah, which is why we're allowed to do it in most cases, he was consistent in his opposition because he felt it was an imitation of church practices. This became a big issue with the innovations introduced starting in the 19th century by the Reform movement. They moved the bima, which was, again, they added an organ, of course, is usher. And so they were opposed to Reform changes on halachic basis, as well as the fact that they were imitating non-Jewish. A big issue, and this is very hard to overcome, non-Jewish music in the synagogue. Now, there are many traditional melodies that cantors use that may have had their origins in church music. Worse than that, what about secular music? Is it permissible to sing Adon Olam to the Beatles tune? as one prominent cantor does very often on Shabbos. If you go on YouTube, you'll see a rabbi and a cantor of some synagogue someplace singing Adon Olam to a Beatles tune and some other tunes. I was looking for, I had a reference. I had the actual tune down here. I forget where it was. But in any event, and very often a cantor about tefillah will use contemporary Israeli music for a tune for a Kel Adon or for Kedusha, and the music that he selects could be a song that is not really appropriate for synagogue use. It could be a totally secular song. Shiur Malshech, right, is a very popular Israeli song, and it's used for Adon Olam in many Orthodox shuls. It's a secular song. Erev Shoshanim is a love song, and we use it in many synagogues for different parts of davening. So that's a question also in terms of taking non-Jewish tunes and making them into Hasidic melodies or a Maccabees tune. The Maccabees make many albums taking secular songs and turning them into Jewish music. Again, we have to look at the context as well as the text, and sometimes Balei Tefillah forget this. So just bear in mind, B'Bechu Kosechem Lo Seilechu does not only apply to religious non-Jewish content, but also to secular content if it's inappropriate for a synagogue to be used during prayer. So these are, again, it's all based on B'Bechu Kosechem Lo Seilechu, who is the Rivash, I remember, in one of his chuvos, says this applies not only to imitating the non-Jew, but doing anything that's simply culturally foolish. If something has no religious value in Judaism, then we should try to avoid doing it. And in America today, that's very challenging. We all dress, in the modern Orthodox world, we all dress like everybody else dresses, except the possibility of the yarmulke and tzitzis, perhaps. We all appreciate music and the theater, and so. But should it intrude into our Jewish observances? And that's where we run into a problem. To the extent that we have to have a very clear delineation between that which is religious and that which is appropriated culturally from the dominant culture, which not necessarily appropriate in a synagogue or in our behavior patterns.
Oh, for me, then that would be good.
So that's what I wanted to share with you. It's a complicated thing, especially in Israel today, because in terms of the military, in terms of a large proportion of the Israeli population is not observant, and they will do certain things: flowers in the cemetery, flowers in the military graves, wreaths, moments of silence. All these type of things are not necessarily intrinsically Jewish, but they've been integrated into aspects of Israeli society, and we just have to be careful that it doesn't intrude too much on our Jewish value system. Questions, comments, critiques? Okay.
Why?
Yes.
What about music written by people that aren't from?
I'm not talking about the books. I'm talking about
Music written by people that are, well, Hatikva
Yeah.
as a classic example.
Right.
By the way, the original version of Hatikva, which Al Jolson made a recording of in the 30s, is different from the text of Hatikva that we use today. But again, if you can avoid it, fine. If there's nothing inappropriate about it, and depending on what the context is, if a non-observant person wrote a melody that praises Hashem for these victories over our enemies, you could probably find heterim to use that particular tune or music, even though the person that wrote it might not be necessarily observant. Clearly, the whole purpose of B'chukosechem lo seilechu is if it will detract from your quote unquote Jewishness. If it's culturally parov, or certainly not negative towards Jewish values, chances are it would not be a problem. But it depends, again, on the context, in my opinion.
If we did every other mitzvah, except for that one, I think we'd be okay.
No question about it. No question about
Okay. Well,
it. Yes.
What
when did Hasidim and Orthodox Jews in general start wearing black and white? How many years ago? 200 years ago?
Yeah. I mean, the whole purpose, first of all, the whole world wore black and white.
Right.
The whole
The
world.
Goyim wore it
the whole
before
world-
the Jews. The priests, didn't the priests wear black and white before the Hasidim started wearing black and white?
Yes, but they also had colorful, they also had red and white. They also had different colors for different religious occasions. But you have to understand that going back hundreds of years, men did not wear colored garments. Women, perhaps. Men did not wear colored garments. They wore black and white predominantly. It was only later on, starting in France, where they started to wear colored garments. And some of these people, it was very, what they call a foppish dress in certain European countries. But most people wore basic black and white. That was how people dressed. You had a white shirt, and because colored clothing, first of all, was expensive because you had to have it dyed, and depending where you lived, this was not common. Hasidim simply wanted to dress differently from everybody else. Or, according to one theory, they wanted to dress the way Polish and Russian nobility dressed. And they apparently wore these frock coats, what we call kapotas today. And that's how they dress, to show that they are royalty. They are elevated from the rest of the population.
They imitated the Goyim. So they imitated the Goyim.
They imitated a higher class of Goyim. Yes. Yes.
So to me, there's such an overemphasis on wearing black and white. Really, there's an overemphasis. You're doing what the Goyim did. You go into Amish country, they're like the Amish.
Okay.
And the Amish were around in the States a long time already with the black and the white.
Again,
Hats.
dressing in black and white simply is a declaration that I'm not going to imitate the way most of the cultural norms dictate I should dress.
But if the priests and the Amish were wearing black before the Hasidim started wearing black, they're imitating the Goyim.
Could be. I mean, as I say, they imitated the nobility, because they held themselves to be nobility. They imitated the nobility. Now, it's interesting, right? Again, cultural norms are very difficult to define because they change so quickly. What was in fashion last week is out of fashion next week. And you have to have a very large wardrobe to keep up with it. I remember, I'm going back now a few years. This was in 1971. I was a rabbi of a large congregation. And my wife's grandmother came to visit for Shabbos. And I happened to have been wearing a very, very light, pale blue shirt with my suit. She was appalled. She was horrified that I should wear anything but a white shirt on Shabbos. And I heard it for weeks from her. How can you, a rabbi no less, get up wearing anything but a white shirt on Shabbos? So these are cultural values. And the cultural values change. what hasn't changed among Hasidim and people on the right is they maintain their difference by dressing a certain way. They're not imitating the Goyim, even though originally it came from that, from the Polish and Russian nobility who dressed in black and white. And maybe the clergy also dressed in black and white, but the clergy were considered a higher level of nobility. But they hadn't changed that. Today, the church has all different colored vestments. And what I find, and I meant to mention this before, what I find fascinating, the Pope wears a yarmulke, cardinals wear yarmulkes, and some bishops wear yarmulkes, what they call a zucchetto. Now, if they're wearing a head covering to show piety, to show that that God is above them, why shouldn't every Catholic wear a kippah? Jews do. Why can't? And then, again, so cultural norms that take away from Jewishness are one thing. Cultural norms that simply are what everybody does, and it has no effect on our Jewish observance, that there's less of a problem with. But again, there's always that slippery slope. If we begin to dress like the Goyim, maybe we'll start behaving like the Goyim. And that's a slippery slope, which is why the people on the right dress the way they do. They don't want to be identified as Kechol HaGoyim, to look like everybody else.
Thank God the Hasidim eat Chinese food.
Wale,
Yes.
where does the minhag of putting stones on the gravesite, where does that come from?
Before you had tombstones, or you had simple markers, the whole purpose of a marker is to when you didn't have fixed areas for cemeteries and you buried somebody out in a field, stones put on the grave simply indicated to a Kohen not to walk here. It's a marker. Today it's put on to indicate somebody visited the tombstone. But the person in the grave doesn't need a reminder of stones on the tombstone. Originally, you had stones that on the grave to let a Kohen know, don't walk near here.
Okay.
That's a simple origin of that.
Wally?
Yeah.
What about imitating non-kosher food, like bacon and bacon bits?
Yeah.
So why do they get a hashgacha?
So it's interesting. It's an excellent question. And when they began producing these products, there were those in the hechsher business who were opposed to it. But ultimately, the people who were going to buy it, they gave a hechsher on it. Because you're not necessarily, it's not religiously oriented, like dressing like the Goyim or so forth. But there are those who are opposed to it. You will not find a Hasidic hechsher, I don't think, on imitation bacon bits and so forth. However, the OU, even though the OU gives a hechsher on imitation beef, they made a decision not to give a hechsher on imitation pork. Totally kosher, totally vegetable based, totally parv, but it's pork. It says pork on it, artificial pork. Nevertheless, parv, whatever, they refuse to give a hechsher on. So the same company that manufactures the vegetable meat products, the beef, and they may also manufacture impossible pork. The impossible pork does not have a hechsher.
But don't they all have like that imitation seafood or stuff? I can't stand.
Yeah, the imitation. So there, yes, the imitation seafood, bacon bits, that has a hechsher. But that seems to have been less of a problem than actual imitation pork. It says pork on the list.
Like the fake crab and the fake shrimp. That's not...
Yeah. I agree. I 100%. It's pollock. It's more than anything else, which is a kosher fish, and they dress it up to look like something else. In all probability, this might violate b'chuko seichem lo seilecho. I'm not paskening. I'm not the chief rabbi of any country, but clearly this is a very good question. And does it violate Bechuko Sechem Lo Selechu? I would think yes. I would think yes. I don't eat those products. However, again, if they're going to make it anyway and sell it anyway, you might as well put a hechsher on it. They draw the line at pork, though. Fish, less of a problem, but pork, they drew the line. But these are all problems in contemporary society. How much you want to imitate the non-Jewish world. If it doesn't have religious implications for us, it's less of a problem.
Wally.
Yeah.
So Hatikva, I remember this from my days in college, because I remember we had to remember like backwards and forwards 3 lyrics. So Hatikva is based, I think, on a 16th century Italian composition, the music for that. So wouldn't that be a problem? I mean, especially we sing that tune in shul all the time to different tefillas. It was written more or less.
Well, I'll go you one step further. There are many cantorial pieces that have their basis in non-Jewish music. And again, you have to know where the stuff comes from. But these are all issues. Again, is it going to affect Jewish practice? That's Bechuko Seichem. Is it the fact that it's a non-Jewish piece of music that may have been used in a church at one time, and now it becomes, in Rabbi Riskin's words, kadoshified into a Jewish piece of music? Does that pose a problem? If I'm singing the Christian melody as a Christian melody, that's a problem. If it's been re-engineered and come out as a cantorial piece of davening, apparently this was considered to be acceptable in certain circles. You don't find traditional Hasidic chazanim singing these tunes. Most of the Hasidic, there aren't that many Hasidic really good, prominent cantors, but they will sing Jewish pieces. There are Hasidic Rebbeim who composed many, many tunes. The Mojitzer Rebbe was known as a great composer. And Ben Sion Schenker was one of their great chazanim. I had the privilege of hearing him davening once in Shmini Atzeres. The Mojitzer Rebbe, during World War I, had to undergo surgery, and they didn't have anesthesia. And he said, do the surgery anyway. And on the operating table, he composed nigunim. And he was totally oblivious to them cutting into his body. He didn't feel a thing because he was someplace else. He was in a different realm. He was composing nigunim and Jewish music. And many of these tunes were lost because they didn't write down the musical notes. And there were so many tunes, Hasidic melodies, that because they didn't necessarily know technical musical annotation. They knew melodies, so they sang. And you sang the tune often enough, you remembered it. I remember, and I spent some time among Hasidim, that, you sing a niggin until the niggin sings you. And that's how you remember it. So again, many cantorial pieces had their origin in non-Jewish or even Christian church melodies, but they became kadoshified and accepted. But you will not find, again, there's a difference between a cantorial performance and a chazan davening during tefillah. And if the melody takes away from the davening, it's a contradiction in terms. If you spend all your time focusing on the melody and not on the words, that is not the purpose of davening. So that's why shuls should probably have a good bal tefillah as opposed to a chazan. But that's my opinion.
Amen.
Anything else? This is a hot topic, it seems. We could probably explore it even further, but any other questions? Good.
Thank you.
Thank
Okay.
you.
Thank you, Chodesh Tov.
Okay, go out there and be.
Hey, thank you. Have a good day and a good Chodesh.
Good code.
Amen.
Good Chodesh. Good day, everybody.
British think Yiddish.